Good afternoon. Today is March 8th, 2023. Welcome to the Ways and Means Committee bill hearings. First bill we have today is House Bill 1164. Chair Wilson, welcome to Ways and Means.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to apologize for my tardiness. I was trying to make sure that my committee got fed before we had our hearings. So.
What?
Move unfavorable. Move unfavorable.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman Atterbury and Vice Chair Wilkins. Distinguished members of Ways and Means, Delegate C.T. Wilson here asking for a favor report on House Bill 1164, Public Schools, Expanded American History and Development Content, Standards Implementation. This bill requires the State Board of Elections to develop content standards for expanded American history, social studies curriculum that includes age-appropriate instruction on the history and contributions of African Americans, American Indians, Asian American, Pacific Islanders, Hispanic Americans, and women, and requires county schools to implement new curriculum in the 24-25 school year. Basically, our public schools are doing our citizens a disservice. This bill came about years ago when my daughter was 11 because she couldn't understand. We would learn things at home, and she's like, well, why did I hear about the Tulsa bombing from a TV show? Why don't I know how many African Americans died in the international slave trade? She's like, I don't understand why we're being left out. And this is when she was 11. And then more recently, we had other states enact laws that actually seemed like the antithesis of truth. You know, that said you can't teach history in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable. And I mean, it doesn't get no more woke than that to me when you really legislate that you can't teach somebody something that may make them uncomfortable. And I think that's very frustrating about American history is it's not always pretty. No history of any country is ever beautiful. And it's studded with tragedies and things of that nature. But my concern is that by glossing over that, you're taking away from people. Not only are they not knowing the truth of their country, but the individuals and the families and the groups that suffered, you're taking away their stoicness. You're putting that under a rug and sweeping it away like they didn't just go through stuff. Like they, in spite of what they went through, aren't still here. And I think it's very important that our students and our children understand what this country is really about, what it's made of. It's not perfect. It's not often pretty, but it's the truth. You know, we're taught about Sally Hemings, that she had 6 children with Thomas Jefferson because he loved her. We weren't taught that she was a 14-year-old slave. And yet some of those children were sold. We don't know who Jane Boleyn is. She's the first black female to graduate from Yale to be admitted to New York Bar and the first black female judge 80 years ago. Franklin McKinley Jones, the accomplishments, pioneered modern refrigeration. Eunice Hunton Carter, mostly have seen like Godfather 1, 2, and 3, but they don't know the granddaughter of the enslaved people, the first African-American to serve as a district state's attorney in New York, and she took down Lucky Luciano. We don't even know that 1 out of every 4 cowboys was black. Now, I know that's not a big deal for some of y'all, but I came up on Westerns, and I never saw a black cowboy. But when you think about it, if they were sharecroppers, they were also working cattle. But so much of this is hidden, and this is just our history. My daughters should be able to look in their history and see people that look like her, as well as the people that don't. I think that nowhere in our history books have we learned about the Rock Springs Massacre in Wyoming, where white miners murdered at least 28 Chinese immigrants because they wanted to earn a living. Or the Texas Rangers, despite no evidence, summarily executed 15 Mexican Americans in a village in retaliation for the raid that they never committed. There are things about our history that are important. The tragedies are just as important as the successes. It's important to demonstrate the resiliency not only of a country, but of its people. I serve this country willingly. I put myself and my life on the line because I love this country, and I've been in many other places of the world. This is the best country I'll ever be in. So I am not here to say that somehow I'm teaching shame. I'm proud of how far we come. I tell my daughters every day, tomorrow is the best day to be black in America. So it's all right to know about our past. It's all right to know about the struggles. It's all right to know about what your people went through. And lastly, I want to make very clear that we don't need to cheapen culture by saying because somebody they had the skin color or the complexion of white, that somehow it's guilt for you to share. That's not the message. That's not the intent. You may be Scottish. Your parents may have got here after mine. And it really throws me off when people get up in arms and clutch their pearls because they think that they're being attacked. I'm an American too. I live on land stolen from the Indians too. I benefit from the slave trades too. This is my country. The railroad systems that I ride that Asian Americans died for, I ride those too. I am just as complicit in receiving the benefits of the horrors that we may have done as everyone else. But they need to be known. They need to be taught. Our children need to be proud of our history, its good and its bad. For all those reasons, I think it's long past due that we implement expanded American history curriculum in Maryland, give our children the tools to look through the knowledge of Americans' successes and its failures, its highs and lows, and the moments we are proud of, even the ones we're not proud of. And for those reasons, I ask this committee to favor report on 1164.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the chair? Delegate Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Chair Wilson, for providing this bill. I think it's important. So we have a similar bill, API curriculum as well. So I think sometimes when we ask teachers why we're not talk about this, sometimes they don't know how to teach. If we don't provide some help for them from the State Board of Education, I feel that's a challenge for them. I really want to thank you for your effort.
Thank you very much, sir.
Any further questions or compliments for the chair? Okay, seeing none, thank you. There is another individual signed up to testify in favor of the bill, Kenneth Phillips, Jr. Is he here? Yes, sir, come on up.
Would you like to step back?
You can stay, he's supporting you. It's whatever you'd like to do.
It's history. I brought my notes. So, well, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Ken Phelps. I am the chair of the Maryland Episcopal Public Policy Network, and I represent the Diocese of Maryland, the Episcopal Diocese. We have followed this bill for several years, actually. And the Diocese of Maryland over 20 years ago began its own historical journey of reconciliation, and that began with the acknowledgement and expression of regret for the Church's support of slavery and for supporting de jure and de facto segregation and discrimination for years beyond abolition. And it's that reconciliation of our history that has enriched us and changed us in ways that we could not have imagined. But we support this bill not just because of the history that it's about, but the truth. Because without truth, without honestly embracing who we were, good and ill, we can never fully hope to become who we might be. Without truth, there can be no reconciliation. Without truth, we can never be set free from the insidious grip of our past. Truth which begs to be heard in the sacred stories of so many people, histories that have been denied or forgotten or downplayed. It struck me that we also saw the movie Lincoln, Spielberg's film. Did you notice that Frederick Douglass did not appear in that film in spite of the influence he had upon Lincoln? I think of my own upbringing, and I think of my lone grandson who is 8. I was a history major in college, and I'm ashamed to admit I did not learn about the Tulsa Massacre until I was in my 40s. I never knew the stories of activist Claudette Colvin or aviator Bessie Coleman, or worse, as a kid, I never got to pretend that I was Bass Reeves, probably the best lawman the West had ever known. I want my grandson to be able to celebrate the fullness of who we are as a people, the triumphs and the honor and the horrors, because history without truth is a fairy tale at best and propaganda at its worst. And as is the case with all sin, too many have suffered at the hands of those who have owned our past for the benefit of few. We urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very eloquent. Any questions for the gentleman? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. There is one individual signed up unfavorable. He is virtual. Vince McAvoy, for 2 minutes when you're ready, please.
Thank you so much, Chair and Committee. In previous years, I have adopted something of a favorable with amendment on this bill. I have to come out opposed to this bill. And it's opposed because of the culture that's going on right now. In the previous iterations of this bill, I'd offered that we should be focusing on not just generic contributions, as Delegate Wilson pointed out, but specific to Maryland. In other words, Jill Carter's father. We know that. We have a picture of a huge minority of delegate women and men, I believe 56. These are national trends and breaking news. That should be applauded and put forth to children. But I do agree with the sponsor also on the issue that we are letting our children down. On the House floor, we just spent an hour on gender ideology, and that is taking up, according to the superintendent of Maryland schools, a huge amount of his time. This shouldn't be the case. We have a culture who tends to go toward, as the delegate brought up, the Godfather, as opposed to people who were instrumental in taking down Lucky Luciano. Also notable in this bill is who's missing from it. Well, Irish, not Scottish, as the sponsor brought up. There's a great deal, that thing of my history, that doesn't get brought up. If I'm interested in it, I can pursue it. We have YouTube and we have all manner of learning abilities. This bill is yet another one of the proclivity of the General Assembly to infringe on the county autonomy and their superintendents, and I think that's the issue. I'm against the bill. Thank you for your time. Available for questions.
Thank you. Any questions for this witness? We have a question from Delegate Patterson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, Delegate Wilson, for providing this meaningful legislation. My question is for Mr. McAvoy, who offered that, I believe he's offered some suggestions in terms of the merits of this bill. Were you also offering an amendment or suggestions in quantity in terms of how the curriculum should be impacted to offer the expansion of American history as relates to those who've contributed and are just left out?
Thank you, Delegate. My continued respect for what you do down in Charles. In previous years, like I said, I brought up those notable that work amongst you and that have, as you have, for a very long time. I'm looking at WJ's report where I'm in Baltimore. We have 31 deaths of children. We really need to focus on the basics. Our children, Delegate Patterson, are not doing okay. Anything that divides them or keeps them focused against what it should be, like what we grew up with, reading, writing, arithmetic, and I'm a big fan of sports in school. I really think that we need to get this back and rein in and start over. I really think that's where we are. When I have a superintendent over in Senate Finance saying he just can't do his job, and he's getting paid a lot of money, like.
Thank you very
Six-
much. I think
Thank
that
you.
the question has been answered. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Any other questions for this witness? Seeing none, that ends the hearing on this bill. Thank you so much, Chair Wilson. I'll now call up Delegate Chisholm, HB 1107.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Ways and Means Committee. Good news is this is my last bill of the session with you guys. For the record, Delegate Brian Chisholm here to offer HB 1107, which also happens to be my birthday, so it should be good luck. To avoid any confusion, the 07 is the day, not the year. Just so. This is a local bill. This is a product of a collaboration of both Anne Arundel County Public Schools, the Health Department, and Jen Corbin, who runs our Anne Arundel County crisis team in Anne Arundel County. I wish Jen could be here. She's an incredible person. She's recognized nationally now. So what we've done in Anne Arundel County, and obviously we still have a lot of work to do, is she has created a program, and this bill would help to bolster that program That program's now been studied by people down in Georgia. She was just recently the guest for the president's State of the Union. What it will do is take all of the resources that we have in Anne Arundel County for combating our mental health crisis problem and putting one person or two positions into place to help create a more efficient and effective model so that when somebody calls into the 211 number, they actually get somebody on the line that can answer a question for them more professionally as to where they should be routed to. We have a tremendous amount of resources in Anne Arundel County, but people are calling into the 211 number, and we're giving them a cafeteria list of things that we have to offer, but we're not real sure where they should go. And as you know, a lot of times this is time vital type of calls, not all of them, but a portion of them, that we need to get these callers, and it is a completely voluntary program. When they call in, we need to get them to the people that they need to speak to immediately. So it's a fill in the gap until we can get a real professional to them in face to face. But when they call in, we want to make sure that we tell them what services we have and what we have to offer as quickly as possible to save lives if need be. And with that, I ask for a favorable report. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions for the delegate on this bill? Okay, seeing none, that ends the hearing on HB 1107. Now calling up Delegate Bhandari, HB 1110.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Harry Bhandari from District 8, presenting House Bill 1110, the Peace and Conflict Studies Education Act. I'm a public school teacher. I've been teaching for over almost like 17 years. Something happened at my school in the beginning of the school year. We lost a kid. I was on the 3rd floor looking the kid, dying. He had a backpack, and I could not sleep for like so many days. And as an educator and as a legislator, I could not forget what happened that day. And the idea of this bill began to take shape in my mind, that I knew that something had to be done to prevent such tragedy from happening again. And I thought that by teaching conflict resolution studies, we can help students understand those skills, how to improve the resolution skills. And if we do not have a peace in our mind, we can create peace outside. And because of this COVID, people are short-tempered. It's very, very hard for our students as well. And so this bill will increase empathy and understanding. That program can teach a student about different culture, perspective, promoting greater empathy and understanding among students. And that can lead to a more inclusive and harmonious school community and reduce the violence. That's number one, by promoting peaceful conflict resolution and teaching nonviolent communication skill. This bill can help reduce incident of violence in a school, and definitely it will improve academic performance. Studies have shown that students who participate in program focused on conflict resolution and social emotional learning tend to perform better academically, and the life skill as well. When our children, they grow, they have to know how to resolve the conflict. There is a conflict everywhere, in politics, in cybersecurity world, in technology. There is a conflict. But our children, they lack how to resolve that conflict. And this bill will do that, and this bill requires the State Department of Education to develop curriculum, content standard for high school peace and conflict studies. Course is a mandate that each county board of education implement this course in each public high school beginning 2024 to 2025 school year. And this bill also mandate that before graduating, the student have to have a certain service learning hours. And this bill mandate that 8 of those service learning hours should be on conflict resolution. I understand that it has a high fiscal notes. We cannot bring back those lives that we lost, but we can prevent the future violence and future lives. And I urge the committee to pass this bill. This is very, very important bill. That a lot of people, they were questioning, oh, your state don't have anything on peace and conflict resolution? I was stopped by a media and they were asking the same question. And this is a very urgent. As an educator, as a dad of public school student, then I urge this committee to pass this bill.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions on this bill? All right, seeing none, that ends the hearing on HB 1110. Now calling up Delegate Fisher for HB 1167.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and the esteemed members of the House Ways and Means Committee. For the record, my name is Delegate Mark Fisher, represent District 27C in beautiful Calvert County, Maryland. Before you is House Bill 1167, Calvert County Civic Education Standards and Curriculum. It's the Social Studies Literacy Act. The bill requires, beginning in 2025-2026 school year, the U.S. government course taught in high school in Calvert County must include a unit on comparative political ideologies. This bill applies only to Calvert County, among other things, to curate oral history resources to be used with civic educational curriculum that provides portraits and patriotism based on personal stories of diverse individuals who have demonstrated civic-minded qualities, including first-person accounts of victims of the governing ideologies of other nations, who can compare those ideologies with that of the United States. This seems like something that should be taught anyway. It's not. I'll be frank with you, we weren't even taught in my high school at the time that there were other countries that exist today as we speak where people are persecuted simply because of their religion or their race, among other things. And so this is something the citizens of Calvert County have asked about for years, and that's why this bill is before you today. Be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Delegate. We have a question from Delegate Henson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for bringing the bill. Am I understanding it correctly that the bill would teach communism to the students?
Good question. The bill teaches comparative ideologies, so it defines and teaches what communism is, what Marxism is, and compares and contrasts ideologies of different countries with democracy and freedom and republics and so forth. So case in point, not very well known, but while I am Roman Catholic, I am married to a Jew whose mother had to flee and go to Switzerland and hide in cemeteries all during the war. Switzerland, many times during that period of time, was, a lot of people don't know this, is in as much as they were independent and neutral, they really kind of weren't in many cases. So you had to hide depending on your faith. Having oral histories of individuals like this talk about the fact that these kinds of regimes existed and that they lived through it is a very beneficial thing. Just like it would be very beneficial to have someone who came from Eastern Europe and lived there during the Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, talking about the way life was there. So yes, I think it's important to educate people about those things.
Does the bill envision a particular evidence-based curriculum, or is the bill designed to be the curriculum?
Fair enough. So in this particular bill, what we have here is the state board will adopt the age-appropriate civic education standards. So it'll ultimately be up to the state board to decide that, based on the bill's direction.
Does the bill have the support of the delegation?
It does. We have Delegate Todd Morgan, who supports it, and then Delegate Jeff Long doesn't oppose it. I mean, he obviously didn't sign on to the bill, but he doesn't necessarily oppose it.
Thank you, Delegate. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks for your question.
Thank you. Any other questions? Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Delegate Fisher, for bringing this proposal bill before us. My question is pretty much in line with Delegate Henson as relates to the need. You've offered that the citizens have asked you to bring this proposal to us. Has this been vetted with the Board of Education in Calvert County?
That's a great question. So I've spoken to a number of members on the board. The Board of Education doesn't want to put this on their actual agenda for a variety of reasons. I'm not necessarily sure the reasons are good reasons or bad reasons, to be fair, but they have never put it on their agenda. So the answer to your question is no, they have not vetted the bill.
Okay, and the last part, again, how do you envision it being a talk? Is it a separate course, or is it incorporated into one of the history classes?
That's the beauty of this. It's just a unit within social studies. So it's not a whole course. It's just a unit of study. And the bill does specify that it's a unit of study. So we're not trying to overlay a ton.
Thank you. One more time, any questions? All right, seeing none, that ends the hearing on HB 1167. Delegate Fisher, HB 1168.
Thank you. Again, for the record, Delegate Mark Fisher, Calvert County District 27C. On behalf of House Bill 1168, titled Calvert County Public High Schools Class Rank System, the Merit Restoration Act. Bill is very simple. It reinstitutes the recognition and the words, in particular, of valedictorian and salutatorian. In Calvert County, a number of years ago, this was eliminated. This is not to say that they don't have class rank, because they do. It says so in the fiscal note. But the fact of the matter is, it does help you when you apply to college if you're the valedictorian. After all, you did all that work. Or the salutatorian. Somewhere along the line, we got out of that because, God forbid, we actually recognize people for excellence. I did talk to, interestingly enough, because I just saw him at District 27 night, our superintendent of schools, Dr. Townsell, who was very gracious and said he actually really likes the idea a lot and wants very much to put this back into place. And he also said the same thing to Delegate Patterson's point, which is that this would have to go in front of the school board naturally. But Dr. Townsell said, you know, it really does help people to get into school, and it would be a good idea for us to put it back into place. So I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Delegate Patterson.
Thank you very much, Delegate Fisher. My question has to do with when it was deactivated. Why is it necessary for it to be in legislation to restore this? Was it in legislation to remove it in prior years?
Nah, that's a great question as well. So the school board years ago decided to get rid of, and I would imagine that anyone here who's a teacher can relate to this. The school board years ago decided to get rid of this themselves because apparently parents were arguing when you had students who were 1/10 of a percentage point apart from becoming the salutatorian or the valedictorian. And apparently it did cause issues, for full disclosure. So for example, if someone had a 3.899 and someone had a 3.898, but someone does win. Someone has the better grade point average. That was the reason that they got rid of it. But recently we had some graduates, especially last year, one in particular who said this would really help him with his application, and Dr. Townsell most definitely agrees. It does make sense.
Thank you.
Delegate Hornberger.
Are these students able to self-anoint? I mean, if they're truly the highest GPA holder, is it forbidden for them to, it's a numerical exercise.
Sure, it is. It is a numeric exercise, and we think that the reason we want to put this in legislation is because there were some reasons to get rid of it before that just didn't make sense because the school board and others just didn't want to address the fact that there was going to be someone who's number one and someone who's number two.
Gotcha, okay.
So,
Okay, thank you.
of course.
Delegate Henson.
Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill as well. What did they replace it with? Did they go to the Latin honor system where you do magna, summa, and cum laude?
So the fiscal writer did call the county, and they do have a ranking system, but generally speaking, it's kind of watered down. So you know what your rank is, but you're not really recognized beyond that as a valedictorian or salutatorian. So you are given honors, of course, I think for being the top 20, if I'm correct. And I think that's great, by the way. So this is not, let's not do that anymore and let's do just this. This is just, hey, can we just recognize the two top people as well as the others as well? I mean, it makes good sense. I mean, all of us here, Delegate Henson, have been to the school ceremonies where they have the award ceremonies, and you see that, and it's pretty cool. It's actually fun to go to those, and you see how smart so many of these children are. But I think that over time, we've gotten to this point where we don't want to recognize these top two people because it upsets some folks, and I think that it's okay to be number one. It's okay to be number two. It's okay to be recognized accordingly, and that's the reason.
Sure. I know other counties that have done it, like Howard County and Carroll County, that the desire was to go to a system that could be more inclusive so that all students that had high achievement could be recognized in the Latin honor system with the magna cum laude and then summa cum laude and cum laude as well. What do you think about systems that are more inclusive of the high achievements of more students than just the two select?
Sure. I think that's a great question. I think that Calvert County is already doing that with respect to recognizing that the top 20 students. I also believe that you should have someone who's the top student and someone who's the second student. And I think it's okay to call them accordingly. And I don't think that that is exclusive. I think that is recognizing excellence and merit, something that is uniquely absent in society today. I want my pilot to be the smartest pilot there is. I want my doctor to be the smartest doctor there is. I want them to be the valedictorian. I want to know that they're the valedictorian. I want to see their diploma that says so. Those are the people that I want, doing these kinds of important jobs. It's okay. It's okay to have excellence, in my opinion.
Thank you, Delegate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, any other questions? Delegate Ebersol.
Chair, so this is the second of two bills where it feels like you're asking for you and us to make a decision for the elected Board of Ed in Calvert County. Do you feel like they're unable to make this decision, or are they wanting you to make this decision? Why aren't we allowing them to make these decisions?
Fair, very good question, and on point as always, Delegate Ebersol.
Well, thank you.
Whose father taught my parents, by the way. Did you know that? His father taught my parents at Catonsville
My
Senior High
father
School.
did teach, but I have not confirmed that he taught
yes.
your parents.
My parents remember. So,
Nor am I going to try.
So, we've been trying to get this on the agenda, and they will not accept it on their agenda. And it's not a personal thing or anything like that. It's not something that they want to address.
But they are elected by the citizens of Calvert County, correct?
Exactly. They
Thank
are
you.
elected by the citizens, and they get to do what they want, as we all know.
And they're answerable for their actions.
Indeed.
Thank you very much.
Well said.
Delegate, is there a letter of support from the delegation on this one?
We can get one.
Okay.
It does support, the delegation does support it. I think it's unanimous on this one, actually.
We'll look out for that. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions?
We have one over here.
Oh, Delegate Wu.
I think that, so if we, thank you, Madam Chair. So Delegate Fisher, thanks for bringing the bill. So my question for you, Now you're trying to manage the school board, let them decide how to do this recognition. Like, what's the path forward? Are you going to tell them how to have a GPA, how to rank the classes? Is that the way for excellency in terms of what you said?
Yes, so the bill is reinstituting valedictorian and the salutatorian, which are the number 1 and number 2 highest GPA students. It's just a name, but it's an important name in the college system when you apply. And, you know, I don't mind saying I was not the valedictorian, the salutatorian in my school, and emphasis, I was not. But if I were, I would most assuredly want to have that title so that I could put it on my college application. And I do think that that's incredibly valuable when you apply.
Thank you.
Of course, thank you for the question. I appreciate it.
Delegate Merrick North.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for this bill. So you mentioned that is it Dr. Townsell?
Dr. Townsell, yeah.
Yes, the new superintendent, that you had a conversation with him and he showed some sort of positive reaction.
He likes the idea a lot.
Is my understanding he's been in the role since July 2022, correct?
He just got there, yes.
Okay. I don't see his testimony filed with this bill.
Yes, Dr. Townsell is a gentleman, to his credit, and he is, well, he wants to run this through the school board, which I think is a good idea because he can't really willy-nilly do it. And I think he's looking for direction, and that's in part what this bill is, but it was really encouraging that he loved the idea. He really did.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Any other questions for Delegate Fisher? Seeing none, that ends the hearing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next up, HB 1202, Delegate Miller.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and fellow members of the most amazingly awesome Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I am Delegate April Miller, and I am asking for a favorable report on House Bill 1202. Many of you know that I served for 8 years on the Board of Ed. What you may not know is why I made the decision to run. My daughter was in 5th grade and had suffered through a terrible math program called Investigations, or Turk Math. I did what any good parent would do. I tried to look up information on the curriculum so that I could help her. It wasn't there. I tried her math book, but most either teach out of sequence or use workbooks or consumables so that the student only brings home a sheet of paper. It got so bad that our school system had parent nights around the county to try to teach parents how to help their children with elementary school math. I talked to her teacher. She was so upset she wasn't even able to teach the basic math facts any longer. I tried to ask the board, but they weren't listening. Parents today face many of the same challenges when they try to help their students. A lot of textbooks are online or are just the consumable workbooks. Teachers often only have a classroom set of books, and special permission needs to be given to take one home. Parents are being confused by what standards or what are standards or what's framework, what is curriculum, and what the heck the difference are. The difference is because the words are often used interchangeably, even in this very room. And what is even being taught in their child's classroom. Math scores are plummeting across the state, reading needed the attention of legislation, and more parents are starting to question if schools are losing what should be a laser focus on education. Then COVID closures brought the classroom into our homes. For the first time, many parents were able to see and hear what their students were being taught. They had a front row seat. And they're concerned, and they did what good parents do. They started researching and trying to find information. They spoke out to their school boards, and this even led to the NSBA inferring that vocal parents should be treated as domestic terrorists, and an education secretary that doesn't recognize parents as primary stakeholders in their own child's education. We've had DOJ reports, prolonged masking, grading scandals, and declining basic achievement. And sadly, many parents are losing faith and trust in our school system. School systems should be proud of what they are teaching in their classrooms. Parents should be aware of the often amazing educational opportunities that are available. The best educational outcomes are achieved when parents are partners with the schools. And the best way to rebuild that waning trust is to codify the transparency that is already prescribed by law. According to the U.S. Code in the Protection of Pupil Rights, parents have the right to inspect all instructional materials that are defined as instructional content that is provided to a student regardless of its format, including printed or representational materials, audiovisual materials, and materials in electronic or digital format, such as materials that are accessible through the internet. This term does not include academic tests and assessments. And in Maryland Annotated Code 4-111, county boards of education are to establish curriculum guides and courses of studies for schools in its jurisdictions, including appropriate programs of instruction or training for mentally or physically handicapped children, and supply printed copies of these materials to any teacher or any interested citizen. HB 1202 simply codifies and updates language for our digital age from federal and state codes so that parents may have access to all the information they need to help their student and to make the best, most informed educational choices for their child. Parents have the fundamental right to not only understand, but to direct the educational upbringing of their own child. Whether they are choosing public, private, charter, homeschool, if what their child is being taught is being shielded from them, then we are impeding their ability to make choices that are in the best interest of their child.
And you urge a favorable report.
And I urge a favorable report. Thank you.
No problem. Any questions for Delegate Miller? Okay, seeing no questions, we'll move on. We'll end that here on HB 1202, and we'll move to your next bill, HB 1203.
So HB 1203, the testimony is going to be a little bit different. So as I said, I served 8 years on the Board of Ed, and I'm very openness and transparency with the school system is incredibly important to me. And we had a recent situation in our county where we had a committee review of library books. I think it's about 30-some library books that are being challenged. And over 1,000 people applied to be on this committee. And if you've done education and you know how many people usually come and apply to committees, 1,000 is a huge number, representing a lot of public interest. So, and the panel itself now will be comprised of about 60 people that are parents, community members, and employees. So I am actually going to read, this is not just coming from me, this is also the opinion of our local newspaper, and they actually editorialized it, so I am going to add them to my testimony. The superintendent, this is quote from the February 15th editorial. The superintendent has decided that the committee will meet and discuss books in secret and then issue a public report when it's done. The Frederick News Post, which contends that the public should be able to hear discussions, asked the Compliance Board, our Open Meetings Compliance Board, for its opinion. The Compliance Board ruled that the plan did not violate Maryland Open Meeting Act, that the school system can keep the discussions of the challenge book secret. We still believe this is a bad idea. The system can legally do so, but that does not mean it should. The Compliance Board decided the questions on narrow grounds, ruling that the Reconsideration Committee did not fit the legal definition of a public body and was not subject to the Open Meeting Acts because of the way it was created. The Compliance Board is an independent, as we all know, state entity created 3 decades ago with 3 members appointed by the governor. It is an advisory body charged with interpreting Maryland's open meeting laws and applying the laws to specific circumstances. In this case, the members agreed with the FCPS analysis of the law as it applies to the Book Review Committee. The school system emphasized separation of powers of the school district and the Frederick County Board of Education. If the school board's policy had required FCPS to form a reconsideration committee, in such circumstances, the Compliance Board might have made another decision according to the opinion. In 2010, the Compliance Board ruled that the Baltimore County Public Schools Redistricting Committee was a public body because the Baltimore County Board of Ed had a policy that clearly required the district superintendent to create it. But with discretion given to the deputy superintendent under the Frederick County Board's policies, the decision in this case was the opposite of the Baltimore County's case. On such narrow grounds, important public issues can be decided. The suitability of books for a school library is a matter of high public interest and importance to the community. This committee will be assessing the values of the Frederick County community and then measuring these books against those values. A community can perhaps make no more significant choice than deciding what books it will let children read. We continue to believe that it is in the best interest of the community and the school system to discuss these questions in public, to hear, understand, and assess the arguments and who's making. Finally, it's worth clarifying one point. Some skeptics have questions whether allowing the public into a meeting creates the potential that observers will be disruptive. That's not the only way to grant public access. You can have a live stream of the meeting. You can have it archived for someone to watch. And also, this achieves the goal of a public meeting and would be fine. So if someone on the committee has opinions on the books, they should be willing to share those opinions publicly. And that's the end of it. So this is one of the reasons I brought this legislation forward, and this editorial was done after I did bring it forward, is that no matter who in the school system is organizing, whether it's the superintendent or the deputy superintendent or the Board of Ed, that committee, once it's organized, should become an open meeting and an open body when it is discussing, especially of interest, such interest to the public. So that is the reason why I decided to go ahead and make it, because there have been other issues in the other counties. I decided to make this a statewide bill instead of a local bill, because I think transparency and openness is an integral part of education and public education in our state. Oh, and please request a favorable opinion.
Thank you so much, Delegate. Any questions for Delegate Miller? Okay, seeing none, that ends the hearing on HB 1203. Next up, Delegate Adams, HB 1115. Yes, please. I have one person that signed up.
I made a mistake, and they're not going to speak, but could they sit at the panel in support of the bill? I set them up as written instead of spoken testimony.
Okay.
All right.
That's, well, in terms of oral testimony, I do have John Bendita.
That'll be it.
Okay, perfect.
That was on me.
Okay.
Okay, for the record, I'm Delegate Chris Adams, presenting House Bill 1115, titled Libraries, Regional Resource Centers Governance Requirements. This is an important bill, although I will admit a technical bill, but the nature of the bill is to alter the governance structure of our 3 public libraries that are designated as regional resource centers, which are Eastern Shore, Southern Maryland, and Western Maryland, by establishing a governing board for each regional resource center. With me are Irene Padilla, who's the state librarian, John Vedetta, who's the director of the Eastern Shore Regional Library, who will be giving testimony, Ashley Teagle, the director of Southern Maryland Regional Library, and Elizabeth Hewlett, director of the Western Maryland Regional Library. I'm asking for your favorable support.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is John Vendetta. As you've heard, I'm the director of the Eastern Shore Regional Library, and I'm here today to speak in support of HB 1115. In 1957, the Regional Resource Center statute was passed into law. That law worked fine for a couple of decades, as the regional resource centers at that time were a very small part of the library services for their counties. Today, the 3 regional libraries have evolved into a major influential force for the 14 rural county libraries that they support. The law governing regional resource centers, though, has not followed suit. Over these 66 years, the governing boards of the regional resource centers have evolved in different ways, and there is no unified governance guidance from the current statute. HB 1115 contains specific language that defines the governance of the regional resource centers and has been vetted and approved by the regional resource center directors, the regional resource center boards, the directors of all 14 library systems and their boards as well, and Irene Padilla, the state librarian, is also way behind this. I'm deeply grateful to Maryland legislature as a whole for their commitment to library service. I respectfully ask for your support for HB 1115, which will allow Maryland's regional resource centers to continue to expand our role in supporting library equity and access in our rural communities. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, and we recognize that there are others here in support. Those are all the folks that we have signed up for oral testimony. Are there any questions for these witnesses or the delegate? Okay, seeing none, thank you so much, Delegate Adams. That
Thank
ends
you,
the
Madam Chair, for
hearing.
your support and consideration today.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
That ends the hearing on HB 1115. Next up, Delegate Tolles, HB 1105. Delegate Tolles does have a virtual witness signed up. So we'll allow you to go, and then if you'd like, your virtual witness can testify, and then we'll take questions.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would love for the virtual witness to testify with me, if that is okay. To be on the same panel.
Okay, we're just looking to make sure Nicholas Askew is in the room.
Thank you.
Not here currently, but if he pops in, we'll provide him an opportunity to testify as well.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. Had a long morning. Sometimes we're up here trying to figure out what time of day it is. But with that being said, good afternoon, Madam Chair and esteemed committee members of House Ways and Means. House Bill 1105 is requiring the State Department of Education to develop curriculum content standards for course of water safety and swimming for public schools in certain grades, requiring the county boards of certain education to implement water safety and having them to offer this course for kids in middle and high schools. The bill does a few things. It asks for the curriculum to be developed by July 2024. Starting in 2025 through 2026, the school year, each school year, the county should implement a course on water safety and swimming, and this bill would allow for physical education credit for students for a successful completion of the course. So if you complete the course, you can get physical education credit in lieu if you complete the swimming course, you would get that in lieu of the physical education credit. And if schools do not have a pool, they may partner with the local parks and recreation facilities. And the reason why this bill is so critically important is because historically, Black Americans, due to chattel slavery in America, robbed an entire race of its connection to the water. And with Jim Crow South, and discrimination prevented Black people access to pools across the United States. We all know the history of that. And because of that, Black people are 5 times more likely to drown than white individuals. And this is the true reasoning behind this bill. Swimming as a curriculum would save lives in our community. And according to USA Swimming, less than 1.5% of the country's nearly 300,000 competitive swimmers are Black, and it's time to change that narrative. Water safety and swimming should be equitable for everyone. And the best way to do this is to allow for our public schools, our middle schools and high schools to develop a curriculum in our public schools. And I ask for your favorable support on HB 1105. You will hear when I talk about Black, less than 1.5% of the country's nearly 300,000 competitive swimmers are Black. You will hear from Nicholas Askew, who is teaching competitive swimming and competing at Howard University, the Howard University for those who are alumni in HBCU. And so I did share an article with Madam Chair. Please hold my testimony, a little grammatical errors I see, but I did speak with Madam Chair, and she's willing to share the article with you so you can see for yourself. And this is where I got many, as well as some other research I've done my statistics from. With that, I will pause here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and I apologize I wasn't here when you began. I
No
was
worries.
in HDO presenting a bill.
I understand.
Mr. Askew, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon. I bring greetings and blessings. My name is Coach Nick Askew. I am the head coach and director for Howard University's Men's and Women's Swimming and Diving Program, the only HBCU in the entire country that has a swimming and diving program at the NCAA level. I stand in support of Bill HB 1105 because it is important to our community that has been underrepresented and has been underserved for far too long in order to be able to bring quality swimming opportunities to our communities in Maryland, as well as to continue to promote water safety and drowning prevention. Ladies and gentlemen, I implore you to think about our future. Drowning is the #1 cause of death in toddlers age 1 to 4 years old, and it is 100% preventable. This bill is a step, a huge step in the direction of being able to have a solution to this public health crisis. Many of our communities are around waterways. Many of our children will try to enjoy different areas around pools and splash parks. And it is our obligation as adults to be able to provide them with the safest opportunities as possible. So again, I implore you to support House Bill 1105 as the head coach of Howard University Swimming and Diving.
Thank you, and Mr. Askew, we appreciate you being here. Please tell your brother we said hello. And I will tell you, because you will appreciate this, we might have a question, I don't know if it's for you or for the delegate. When I have 3 kids, and when I had my first child, my father said 2 things. They need to learn how to swim, and they need to learn how to ski. It's the first thing out of his mouth. I was like, forget reading. Okay, we do have a question, Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate, for bringing this forward.
Sure.
This is just, it speaks to my heart. When I was growing up in Maryland, we had lessons in 4th and 5th grade and in middle school, and we were fortunate enough to be able to walk to our high school for our swim lessons. However, in Frederick County, that and one other pool are the only pools left when we constructed Frederick High. Unfortunately, we were not able, because of funding, to be able to rebuild the pool that was at Frederick High, which was a huge loss to the community. So my question for you is, does this have to be during the school day? Are you considering that this elective would have to be during the school day? Because that's going to cause some issues.
Well, as you will see in the bill, I'm leaving it up to the local jurisdiction to decide what is best for that jurisdiction. So I want to be able to, I don't think we should be able to micromanage what that particular school jurisdiction would like to do. So if they feel that they can receive the credit in school and out of school, then that's up to their local jurisdiction.
Okay, yeah, because that would be amazing if it could be an elective that would count for especially for their PE credit. And then would you consider, where you said Parks and Rec agency, would you consider to add like a YMCA or another outside partner to that to kind of open that up a little bit?
Yes, and my intent was to add the YMCA. So I would definitely, be open to that. I know, I just want to speak in terms of Prince George's County. We sponsor with Parks and Recreations to offer the program for 2nd graders. So we currently have that existing in Prince George's County through a grant program, but it shouldn't be if we only have the funding to do it. And I will also add, Delegate Miller, that not that I want to be starting something, in the words of Michael Jackson, but and forgive my colleagues here from Southern Maryland, but in Charles County schools, they build pools with their high schools. So
crushed me.
I wanted first in Prince George's County, then you could come second, Delegate Miller. But that is, sort of where I would like to go. It should be something that's not, if we can afford it, it should be something that's critical to have. As Coach Askew mentioned, it would save so many lives in our community. So I don't know if you want to add anything, Coach. I'm sorry, if Madam Chair allows me to add anything.
No, Mr. Askew, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I just, again, just fully support this opportunity. I think that this is a great step in the right direction. You know, a lot of it has to do with that first exposure. And that will lead to in being able to capture the kids, meet them where they are, which is in the schools, so that we can truly break the cycle.
We have another, oh, I'm sorry,
No, I was
Delegate.
just going to say, thank you so much. It's great.
You're welcome.
Delegate Fair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing this important environmental justice bill forward. Truly, the issues around the historical inaccess of Black and brown communities to simple things like water facilities and pools is heartbreaking and heart-wrenching to know has existed in our community. But I wanted to turn attention to the fiscal summary because I'm lost by it. I've read a lot of we've all read a lot of these fiscal notes over the years. And this one is really weird. They are claiming hundreds of thousands of dollars without any logical backing of where that hundreds of thousands of dollars could possibly, we might have to build pools, we might not, we might have to do this, we might not. Could you comment on the fiscal note and your general thoughts on how they came to that conclusion?
Sure. Well, I apologize. I do not have the fiscal note in front of me, and we know how this works. Sometimes you get the fiscal note the day before. But I think that, as you indicated, if you have to build pools in the schools, it ultimately can cost thousands of dollars, right? But allowing for the schools to be able to partner with the Parks and Recreation facility that already have existing pools that already paid for without tax dollars, that is a plus. And in the program I indicated in Prince George's County, they actually provide, resources, busing, and so forth. Again, I don't want to get down that train, road, because that is up to the local jurisdiction. But they allow for a partnership with our Parks and Recreation to cut that cost, knowing that not all, that hardly no school, but one school in Prince George's County has a pool in their high school. So
thank you.
You're
I really
welcome.
appreciate that.
Thank you for the question.
Delegate Patterson.
Chair, and thank you very much, Delegate Tolles, for bringing this legislation to our attention and for citing, as you well know, that Charles County made an effort simply because of the amount of water that surrounds our county and the concern that there were not enough places or resources for actual swimming. My question is, as you move forward in your legislation, are you interested in incorporating best practices? Because it is, when you look at the fiscal note, it is manageable, and really, it depends really on the school system, because I believe that will help and strengthen the legislation, but it's a very good one, and thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you, Madam Delegate. I am open to incorporating any best practices. I think it's so important to start the conversation and get this going. We can't ignore, this is, in my opinion, a public health crisis. And I know in talking to some of my colleagues from Anne Arundel County, as you indicated, they are surrounded by water. So they teach some level of curriculum as well, and mainly because they are surrounded by water. And as you said, Charles County being surrounded by water, it is so important to have that curriculum and have the pools in the schools. But we can't forget, those like areas that do not have water, but it's still, as Coach Askew indicated, they go to water parks, they go to friends and family homes with pools. And so we want to teach them early to be safe.
Are there any more questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Thank you, Delegate. Thank you, Coach Askew.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. Before Coach Askew hang up, I just want to indicate that they are national champions at Howard University.
Okay.
So that can be a round of applause for them. And they are actually traveling now to another competition. So they're doing very well. We're so proud of them in our region. As you know, many folks from all over the state attend Howard University. So thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for
Thank
being
you
here
for that,
today.
Delegate Tolles.
Thank you.
All right, and that concludes the bill hearing for House Bill 1105, House Bill 1222, Delegate Guyton. And you have two folks you want to bring up? Mary Manzoni.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Sylvia Lawson, are they coming up with you?
I thought I had quite a few state superintendents coming up, but I'll take Superintendent Lawson. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I am Delegate Michelle Guyton from District 42B in Baltimore County, once again in front of my second favorite committee here in the House of Delegates. I am asking you for your thoughtful consideration, as you always do, of House Bill 1222, which I hope is a lucky number. This puts into statute a required state funding match for the Division of Rehabilitation Services in the Maryland State Department of Education. And you all will recall a few weeks ago, I came in and did the whole tutorial of what the Division of Rehabilitation Services acronym is, which is DOORS, and I do that so I don't have to keep repeating it over and over, and so that they don't either. So this request for full funding in statute originated from the work group to study DOORS that, thank you to this committee, you established last year and has been meeting throughout the year. This is one of the strongest recommendations from their preliminary report this year. It's also supported, as you can see, by some folks on my panel, by the Maryland State Department of Education. So the basis of this is that in order for Maryland to receive our full allotment from federal grant programs, for the vocational rehabilitation program in the state, we are required to match funds at 21.3%. Currently, Maryland has only been matching those funds at 20%. So this leaves significant federal funding on the table. So I'm going to ask you to set aside the nasty fiscal note that you have for this bill and listen with open ears and eyes and brain with the explanation that you'll hear from the department on that. Because in fact, this funding has a very large return on investment. I've been told by one of the assistant secretaries here that for every $1,000 the state does not contribute to this grant funding, we lose $3,695,000 in federal funds. So think about the money that we are leaving on the table. So I ask for your favorable report on House Bill 1222, which will help improve the performance of the Division of Rehabilitation Services, DOORS, by ensuring that Maryland adequately meets our funding obligations in the future and can serve our students who need it better. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Dr. Sylvia Lawson, Deputy State Superintendent at the Maryland State Department of Education, and I am too here today to urge a favorable report for House Bill 1222. MSDE's Division of Rehabilitation Services, or as Delegate Guyton has said, DOORS, is comprised of the state Public Vocational Rehabilitation Program and Disability Determination Services. House Bill 1222 codifies the recommendation of the Commission as required from the Student Job Transformation Act that was passed last year in 2022. MSDE cannot implement some of these recommendations without statutory direction. The bill will, 1, provide the positions necessary to allow MSDE and DOORS to directly tackle the long-standing and persistent wait list of Marylanders awaiting determination services and the delivery of those services. 2, it will also ensure that Maryland can continue to provide necessary services by codifying in state law the requirement that Maryland maintains its current state/federal match rate. The positions provided in House Bill 1222 have the double purpose of, first and foremost, addressing service delivery and caseloads of rehabilitation specialists, and second, through the funding associated with these positions, ensure that MSDE will continue to meet its current federal match. To be clear, while the cost of the bill is $1.3 million that is associated with these positions, the cost of not implementing the law is far greater. Put simply, Maryland, absent from the bill, would turn away $4.8 million annually. Therefore, the State Department of Education urge a favorable report for House Bill 1222.
Thank you. And I apologize, I told her to continue because I know how sweet you are, but that was definitely in your purview, so thank you for that. I did also neglect to mention that this bill is cross-filed in the Senate by Senators Gazzoni and Zucker.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and honorable committee members. My name is Mary Manzoni, and I am not with MSDE. I am with Maryland Works. I serve as the CEO. Maryland Works is a statewide association of nonprofit community service providers and individual workforce development professionals who provide job training, employment, and business ownership to individuals with disabilities. As the delegate articulated, Maryland's been leaving money on the table. And I've been working with DOORS. We've had a partnership for many, many years. So I'm here to advocate and strongly urge the support and passing of House Bill 1222. I did want to just give you some stats on the current number of individuals who are being served actively by the Division of Rehab Services. There's currently 21,816 active cases. There's also approximately 2,700 people waiting on a waiting list to be served. Opening up and providing more resources and funding and PINs will allow more people to be served, and there'd be more equity in the people who want to go back to work. This is an untapped labor pool, so I really feel like this is the right thing to do in helping these people go back to work, get jobs, and become independent and get careers. So I strongly urge your support on House Bill 1222. Thank you.
Committee, are there any questions for Delegate Guyton or her panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. And that concludes the testimony on House Bill 1222. Delegate Guyton, House Bill 1091, and there are 2 people signed up favorable with amendments. They are virtual.
Thank you again, committee. Well, I am here to request your favorable report also on House Bill 1091. This legislation expands the work also done by this committee and by the House of Delegates and the Senate in 2019 with the passage of the Ready to Read Act. Many of you were here, many of you were not. It was wonderful work that actually increased our screening and our ability to identify students very early on who had reading difficulties and address them directly. What this bill does is makes alterations to the original legislation to ensure that our educational system doesn't miss an opportunity to assist older children who are transfers to Maryland or English language learners if they are demonstrating reading difficulties. So the 2019 bill put regulations into place that required all schools in Maryland, public schools, to screen every kindergartner or first grader if they weren't in kindergarten in public school for reading difficulties, basically for dyslexia. It also requires schools, and this is already in law, to screen new students who transfer into that school during the elementary school years, who haven't been previously screened and who are experiencing reading difficulties. This bill does 2 things. 1, it expands that group from children who are only transferring into schools during elementary school to those who are transferring into schools also up to middle school age, so up to 8th grade, right? And this bill was brought to me originally by teachers who were teaching middle schoolers who said these kids had not ever been identified. So that was a group of concern. The second group of concern is a group of children who are English language learners and who are not able to be screened appropriately in their native language when they're in kindergarten or first grade because we don't have those screeners available in all of their languages. I know Padonia International School in my district has almost 60 different languages spoken among the students in that elementary school. So what this bill does is say that after that student has been established to have English language speaking and reading proficiency, right? So this is after they've gotten all the ESOL services and they are still exhibiting reading difficulties, we will screen them in English for dyslexia. Right? I want to be very clear that I am extremely thankful to my one unfavorable letter that you have in your packet, okay? That came from MSCA. We did not speak about this bill at all until yesterday when I got the packet from somebody and went, oh my gosh, I must have made a terrible mistake. And in fact, I did. So I'm the first one to admit that this bill, actually the language that I had written, did not do in the language of the bill what I just expressed to you that it would do, right? That was my fault, and I appreciate MSEA meeting with me, pointing that out and saying what their concerns with the bill would be. So we sat down and I put in the amendment that's hopefully in front of all of you right now to address their concerns and to honestly make the bill do what I just said it would do, which was my intent all along. We all get tired and make mistakes, but I will be the first one to own it. And I'll also be the first one to say thank you to the group that was willing to work with me to actually make this fit the needs of the students. So with all of that, I thank you for a favorable report on House Bill 1091. I hope that you will consider one. And this will ensure that all of our students, whether they were in kindergarten or first grade in Maryland, or not in kindergarten in Maryland, have equal and equitable access to the disability interventions that they need in order to learn to read. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I do believe I have some folks virtually with us.
Yes. First, Brianna January for 2 minutes, please. Brianna, you have like a wonderful name. It's like a superhero name. Every time I call you up, yeah, I'm just like, that's an awesome name.
I could not change it when I was married. There's just no way. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, Honorable Committee. Brianna January on behalf of MACO in support of HB 1091 with amendments. Committee, counties agree strongly with the bill sponsor on the critical importance of healthy vision and vision screenings for the success of our students. And we have engaged at the county level on various iterations of this bill and similar ones for a very long time. We are concerned a bit with the potentially significant fiscal impact of HB 1091 to schools and counties. The fiscal note does call that potentially significant. We're especially concerned by potentially challenging costs associated with increased supplemental reading instruction as a result of this bill. This could require hiring additional staff at a time when, to be frank, in the field of education, as this committee well knows, it's very challenging to hire and retain our staff as it is. And while we're also significantly ramping up our blueprint funding. As such, MACO does suggest a simple amendment to require the state to provide supplemental aid via relevant blueprint resources or other resources to cover the costs that are associated with a mandated increase in just that supplemental reading instruction, not in additional screenings. We're perfectly fine with that, that do result from the bill. Counties are happy to work with the bill sponsor and committee on this bill and others like it to best serve Maryland students and to balance our county concerns. With that, we urge a favorable report with that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions for Ms. January? Delegate Ebersol.
So thank you for your testimony. I'm looking at the fiscal note and they're oblique about the amount they think this might cost. Has anybody done a cost analysis? Because if it's small, then I think, it'd be a great bill. And so maybe that's why they're hesitant. Do you have anything on that?
Thank you so much for that question, Delegate. This is exactly our concern as well. It's difficult to really gauge what this would require. It would be a different fiscal impact for each county. It would depend on a number of things, including the amount of students that are transferring from any grade level into our public school system, as well as any families that English is not their primary or first language spoken at home. And so right now that's really hard to gauge, but what we do know is that there could be a lot of staffing requirements added on, whether it be in school additional supplemental reading instruction, whether it be out of school, post school before school tutoring. We're just mostly concerned with that staffing element and what costs that might come with increasing staffing hours to do so at a time when our local schools are really struggling to hire and retain as it is.
It would really give us a chance to consider this seriously if we could get that
Yeah.
from someone. I'd love that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Delegate, for bringing this forward. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I read the MSEA's report. I haven't seen the amendment yet, but I'm having them check the email. I guess that would be where it would be most likely. Can you talk to me about how you would address it? If you have it, if you don't, I'll wait till I get the amendment, that's fine. Because one of the things I was going to say is the aspect at secondary schools, particularly our middle schools. I know when we talked a lot about dyslexia and how to actually identify and even treat going forward and continuing that process into the middle school years. A lot of the schools did not have the staff or the screening materials or the supplemental aids that they needed to teach the kids. So that was my question.
Sure, thank you for that question. I really appreciate it because I know you have some background in this, so that's particularly meaningful. Yeah, the Maryland State Education Association letter that you're referring to, first of all, their concerns were appropriate purely because my language wasn't where it needed to be. So the description that I gave you of the bill just now is with the amendment I worked out in the room with them. So that, and I'm not saying they have absolutely no concerns. I don't actually know because this all happened yesterday evening and we sat down and worked it out. But now the bill does what it was meant to do and what they were concerned with. Their argument here, and it's another reason that we took off high schoolers, right? Because we know, and I think what you're alluding to, is that there are good, simple, no or low cost screener, no cost really screeners for kids up through 8th grade, but in high school it's a very difficult, more complicated situation because there are so many different comorbids that go into those difficulties that we really can't affect as much at that point. So this bill now, it was originally written to go up all the way through high school. Now it only goes up through middle school for that reason. The other thing was there was some misunderstanding about whether I was requesting that all students who moved in or transferred would be screened, or all students who had been identified as ESOL would be screened, and no, they are not. These are only those who transfer in who haven't had English as their first language and still are having learning difficulties, which legally our schools would be required to screen anyway, but it doesn't always happen. And then the third part of their letter is that they talk a lot about the English proficiency test that is given to students when they come into our schools with English as a second language. It's an excellent tool, but it does not evaluate for reading difficulties. What it does is evaluate the proficiency of that student only in English. So if that student is not performing well in English, they're automatically going to perform poorly in the reading disability section of that test, the WIDA. So what I'm saying is let's don't double diagnose kids. Let's don't use that at all to diagnose them with reading difficulties. All that diagnoses them with is English not being their first language. Right? Let's wait until they're actually considered proficient, which could be measured with this same tool later on. And if they're still not reading well, then we test for the actual problem, which is possibly dyslexia, maybe other things. So does that help? Okay.
Okay, we do have someone else signed up to testify virtually. Thank you, Ms. January, for being here today. Carlene Spitalnik. I hope I pronounced that right, but whenever you're ready, Ms. Spitalnik.
Okay. Chair Atterbury and members of the committee, I'm Carlene Spitalnik, and as a reading advocate and member of the Reading League Maryland and Decoding Dyslexia Maryland, I urge your support of House Bill 1091 with amendments. The Ready to Read Act, which was passed in 2019, established a prevention system in elementary schools to identify struggling readers before they fall behind. The act requires the screening of every kindergarten student using valid, reliable, and quick assessments to identify struggling readers and provide interventions for those who need it. Maryland is in the third year of implementing the Ready to Read Act, and I have heard teachers and administrators say struggling readers are receiving help and meeting grade level expectations in reading. However, many students still struggle with reading, particularly older, underserved students who were not screened in kindergarten. House Bill 1091 proposes to amend the Ready to Read Act to identify and provide help to students up to 8th grade who enter the school system after the universal kindergarten screening, as well as English learners up to the 8th grade. Screening English learners will help ensure that those who have learning difficulties, disabilities, or need more support for reading are not missed. Moreover, I'm suggesting an amendment that incorporates screening assessments that test skills that are predictive of reading success for grades 1 through 8. The Ready to Read Act currently only includes predictive reading skills for kindergarten students. Reading is the foundation for learning every subject in school. The Maryland Blueprint expects students to be college and career ready by the end of 10th grade, but that requires strong reading skills. House Bill 1091 will strengthen the Ready to Read Act so more students can master reading early. I urge you to support House Bill 1091 with proposed amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this witness? Okay, seeing none, are there any other questions for Delegate Guyton? Seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 1091.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee.
Delegate Eversole, House Bill 1047. And then you have Kimberly Pogue signed up favorable with amendment, and then you have 2 folks signed up virtually.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of this committee. It's always fun to be in front of you. Always quite relaxed when I'm here. I'm nervous in other committees because they don't like me. You don't either, but you don't show it, and I appreciate that. I bring for you House Bill 1047, a bill that was brought forward to me by Juvenile Services. If you paid attention last year, Juvenile Services was separated to be its own education agency last year. One of the things that happens when teachers transfer from county to county in Maryland, they retain at some level, and often at a complete level, their sick leave that they've accrued during the years they've worked in the other county. They also retain, if they are 12-month employees, their eligibility for vacation during that time. Sometimes there is equity between pay or step between them, and Juvenile Services just wants to be able to attract good teachers to come to their system without losing their sick leave or losing their eligibility for vacation or even losing pay. And so we're trying to put Juvenile Services in a similar standing only in this area with county-to-county work, so that they sort of act as a county when someone wants to go there. And that's good because you know and I know we need good teachers in Juvenile Services. And so this bill simply says that they would retain their sick leave in a similar manner that they would have if they went county to county. Their vacation eligibility. We do have some language in there about pay, which is, I believe, we're working real hard on the drafting. I believe it's a little too direct. Counties pay different amounts of money. Counties offer different steps to people that move from county to county. And so I'm going to suggest an amendment that will make it so that there is some parity there in the way that counties offer parity, but I do know that if I transferred way late in my career from one county to another, I might have dropped a couple of steps in the new county. So there's no absolute rules there, but we would ask them to pay attention to that. Right now, it's very specific about pay levels, and I don't think that's fair to Juvenile Services, actually, because some counties pay a lot of money. So with that said, the idea here is to help Juvenile Services be able to function in their new kind of status, and I hope you'll give this bill a favorable response, and thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Kimberly Pogue, and I'm the Superintendent of the Juvenile Services Education Program. The Juvenile Services Education Program Board supports House Bill 1047 with amendments. This bill will help to attract and retain teachers. JSEP faces the same teacher shortages that plague many local school districts. Prior to July 1, 2022, when JSEP was a unit with the Maryland State Department of Education, JSEP had a policy that educators hired from local school districts were able to transfer their sick leave balances that they had accrued while working at the local level. Leave-related benefits are vitally important to teachers coming from local school districts because they are used to having a summer vacation, which JSEP does not offer. A JSEP educator hired prior to July 2022 was given credit for his or her years of service at the local level. The educator's start date with the state was adjusted to reflect the years of service the employee accrued with the local school system. New hires coming to JSEP from local school districts with significant experience started out their employment with the state having a higher leave accrual rate than they would otherwise have received as new state employees. Under this amended bill, a new JSEP teacher with 10 years of teaching experience in a local school system would start by earning 15 days of leave instead of 10. This bill would only affect teachers' leave and would be a helpful retention tool for JSEP and ensure parity with JSEP staff that transitioned from MSDE on July 1st, 2022. If JSEP is to be a model for other states, we need to ensure that we are able to attract and maintain highly qualified teachers to work with youth in our justice system. Thank you, and for these reasons, I urge you for a favorable report on House Bill 1047 with the proposed amendments.
Thank you. I'm going to call up virtual witnesses. Sybil Hughes, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sybil Hughes, and I currently work as a teacher at Western Maryland Children's Center in Hagerstown, Maryland. I began at WMCC October of 2022 after a 26-year career in Montgomery County Public Schools. I have taught a multitude of subjects throughout my 26 teaching career. When I decided to start the process to come teach for the state of Maryland with DJS in May of 2022, I began to research the position and the pros and cons. I was very excited and looking forward to a new adventure. As I researched, I did see some sacrifices that I was going to have to make to embark on this new adventure. I was going to have to work during the summer for the first time in 26 years. Sacrifice accepted. As I continued to research, one sacrifice that I believed was unfair is the inability to transfer leave and accrue leave appropriately after the transition from MSDE to DJS. I am hopeful that my 26 years as an educator in the state of Maryland at a public school will hold some weight. I am hopeful that my dedication to the art of teaching will be recognized and I will be given leave that is equivalent to other DJS teachers with 26 years of service. I am willing to work with these young men 12 months a year. That is a sacrifice that is absolutely worth it. It is not even a career or a calling. It is what I was put on this earth to do. I make a difference in these boys' lives. I work extremely hard to encourage their interest in their education and help them to progress educationally. Teachers work tirelessly to provide engaging, inspiring, rigorous curricula for the young men in these facilities. We develop lessons, grade activities and assessments, create research projects, and much, much more. Many times this occurs on our own time. There have been many times that I was driving with my own children and have come up with an idea for a lesson. I then spend the next 2 to 3 hours creating that lesson. Many of us are passionate and selfless in doing our jobs. When I left MCPS, I was only given one option: to let go of all of my leave. Once I arrived, I was given the same amount of annual leave as an educator fresh out of college teaching for the first time. This seems very inequitable. We are only asking for a fair and equitable decision when it comes to this issue. My hope is that you will see this issue in the same way that we educators do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Hughes before I let her go? Okay, thank you, Ms. Hughes, very much. Next, Tanya Montgomery, please. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Montgomery.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Tanya Montgomery. I serve as principal of Western Maryland Children's Center, a secure detention facility in Washington County, Maryland. I transitioned to the Department of Juvenile Services in July of 2022 after an 18-year career as an educator and administrator with Baltimore City Schools. Prior to moving forward with the vetting process for this position, I contacted Human Resources to find out about the transfer of leave. And I was told as a state employee, my leave would transfer after accepting employment. This was an important factor in my decision, as I had accrued a very healthy sick leave balance over my time with city schools, and I know that this unused leave factors into my retirement. After accepting the position with DJS, I found out that I was actually not eligible to transfer the sick leave I had earned, nor was I able to accrue leave appropriately based on my years of service. I came into DJS in the same standing as a first-year employee without any experience, and it's disheartening to know that I had lost everything I had earned over 18 years with Baltimore City. Since the transfer of leave was not legislatively mandated, those of us who work for local school systems were not afforded the same rights as educators and administrators who work directly for MSDE. I am requesting that the legislation be adjusted retroactively to ensure that all staff who transferred into JSEP beginning July of 2022 receive the same benefits that our colleagues from MSDE received. This would include a retroactive adjustment for accrued sick leave, as well as recognition of seniority, allowing for the adjustment to the vacation schedule based on years of service. We are all educators for the state of Maryland, and I'm asking that whatever leave we had accrued through our local system be able to transfer with us when accepting employment with DJS. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Montgomery? Okay, thank you, Ms. Montgomery. Questions for the bill sponsor, Delegate Hornberger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is terrible oversight. Definitely want to resolve it. But my question is, are both of these cohorts in a bargaining unit, and why wasn't this resolved via the normal process for these sort of things?
When it was with MSDE, it was legislatively mandated.
Okay.
And it was an oversight, I believe, in the drafting of Senate Bill 497 that it was not addressed.
Okay.
6-204 of the Maryland Code of Education mandates that the leave transfer.
So it probably wasn't bargained before because it's a statewide agreement. And so with them being chipped out, we suddenly need to kind of let them.
Yeah, I just, I was on the committee when that happened, and I don't want to apologize for all of us, but it's a horrible oversight, and I think that this committee is willing to work to try to restore your earned things, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 1047. Delegate Roof, House Bill 1114. And you have Megan Berger, Michelle Hall, Maddie Long, Levi Bradford, and then some virtual folks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, it's great to be back 2 times in 2 days. For the record, I'm Delegate Sheila Ruth, presenting House Bill 1114. Many of you have seen this before. It's passed the House, this committee, and the House twice now. It also passed the Senate last session, but with an amendment, and the two versions never were able to cross and reconcile. So I brought it back again, hoping that we can get it across the line this time. For those of you who are new, a bit of background. Maryland has a statute in the educational code which allows students to be charged with a misdemeanor if they willfully disturb or otherwise willfully prevent the orderly conduct of the activities, administration, or classes of any institution of elementary, secondary, or higher education. So students can be charged with a crime and referred to the juvenile justice system for activities like storming out of class, yelling at a teacher, things that are clearly inappropriate, that they need to learn are inappropriate behavior, but the criminal justice system is not the place to learn that behavior, and in fact, it can have the opposite effect. The human brain doesn't reach full maturity when it comes to decision-making or judgment until approximately age of 25, and young people lack the impulse control that many adults have. And so they do need to learn that, but it shouldn't be a crime. The consequences of this are potentially devastating. A 2006 study found that first-time arrest during high school nearly doubles the odds of high school dropout, while a court appearance nearly quadruples the odds of dropout. So the consequences of charging a student for acting in line with their age and brain development are potentially long-term and devastating and play a role in the school-to-prison pipeline. The consequences of this law fall most heavily on Black students, students of color, and disabled students. According to the most recent data that we have, 82% of students charged with this disturbing school activities were Black children and children of color. And then In addition to that, children with disabilities represent 23% of all school arrests, but only make up about 12% of the student population. Particularly, students with special needs may have trouble complying with a directive or may lack the impulse control even more so than other students. And so this law is very, this has a disparate impact on students with disabilities. There are school behavior systems to teach young people appropriate behavior. There are lots of ways of dealing with this besides sending students to the criminal justice system. I want to, first of all, point out that anything that isn't, this is in the education code, but anything that's in the criminal code, and we have a lot of different things in the criminal code that are considered actual crimes, and anything that is a crime can still be charged on school grounds even if this bill were to pass. This bill, House Bill 1114, all it says is that this statute in the education code cannot be used to charge students. It could still be used for anyone coming into the school from outside, any non-students. I also want to mention one new bit of information, which I believe some of my panel will get more into, is that there was a Fourth Circuit decision which upheld a South Carolina District Court decision that held that South Carolina's disturbing schools law, which is very, very similar to ours, were unconstitutionally vague. So our law may already be unconstitutional. So it's time to get it out of the education code, because our education code should be about preparing students for the future. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me back. Good afternoon, my name is Michelle Hall. I am an attorney with the Office of the Public Defender and here to urge this committee to issue a favorable report on HB 1114. Education Code 26101 prohibits the willful disturbance of school activities, and unfortunately, in its implementation, this law has been used to prosecute many of our youngest children, many children with disabilities, and many children of color for behavior that is consistent with typical adolescent development. As detailed in our written testimony, our office has regularly defended children charged with disturbing school operations for walking out of class without permission, cursing, accidentally hitting a staff member when taking off a belt, taking a cupcake from another student's tray, and coloring on a desk. Prosecuting children for these types of behaviors is counterproductive, undermines adolescent development, and often is deployed in a discriminatory manner. This bill rectifies this issue by precluding students from being prosecuted under this statute. There are 2 points that I want to emphasize from the criminal law perspective. First, as Delegate Ruth said, nothing in this bill prohibits students or anyone else from being prosecuted for criminal conduct that occurs on school property. So individuals who commit an assault, bring weapons, engage in threats, or other criminal behavior can and are prosecuted under the corresponding part of the criminal code. The problem with this statute is that it is so broad that it captures a lot of behavior that is simply not criminal, and that is where the problem comes in. And this leads to the second point, as Delegate Ruth pointed out, the statute is likely unconstitutional. In a recent opinion from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, the circuit that we are underneath as Maryland, the court held that South Carolina's disturbing school operations statute was unconstitutionally vague because students were not on notice of what behavior was covered and what was not. That's the same complaint that we have raised the past 3 years with respect to this statute. I'll note that during the litigation of that case, Kenny versus Wilson, the legislature amended the statute so as to exclude students from its reach and also to define what constitutes disruption. And here we are asking for the constitutional minimum. To ensure that children and students are not prosecuted simply for being children, we urge this committee to finish its work from last year and issue a favorable report. Thank you.
Chair, members, if I may. My name is Levi Bradford. I'm an attorney with the Public Justice Center's Education Stability Project. We work to advance racial equity in public education. We are a member of the Maryland Coalition to Reform School Discipline, which is a coalition dedicated to transforming school discipline practices within Maryland in the public school system. CRSD and the Public Justice Center strongly support HB 1114, which would amend the Maryland Education Code, Section 26101, to no longer criminalize students for school disruption. Just last year, we at the Public Justice Center had a client be charged with disrupting school under this statute. I'll call her Jenny. It's not her real name, but we want to protect her privacy. Jenny is a student with ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder. Due to her diagnoses, Jenny struggles with impulsivity, staying on task, and following adult directions. And she attends therapy and takes medication to help her manage. A few days after turning 14, Jenny was charged with disrupting school under the statute. That morning, when Jenny got to class, she saw that she was going to be seated next to another girl who had recently been racist towards Jenny and had recently called her the N-word earlier that month. Jenny, knowing herself, said, quote, "Hell no, I can't do this," collected her things and left the classroom without permission. She felt herself getting mad and about to blow up, so she walked away from the situation. She wanted to talk through her frustration, but her trusted adults were not at school that day. She went over to the office of one of her trusted adults, where a substitute told her she could sit while she did her work. The principal came to the office and told Jenny to go back to class, and Jenny refused. The principal repeated herself, and Jenny again refused and told the principal, quote, "Shut up, stop talking to me." And that is it. That is what Jenny was arrested for, refusing to go back to class. Her behavior was never seen for what it really was, which was a signal that she needed care and support. See, Jenny was in the process of being evaluated for an IEP, and that incident should have signaled to the school the imperative to get that IEP in place. She is not a unique situation. We have clients as young as 11 get charged under the statute. We respectfully ask that the committee help make Jenny's case a thing of the past and issue a favorable report on House Bill 1114. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Megan Berger. I'm an attorney with Disability Rights Maryland, the state's protection and advocacy agency for individuals with disabilities. I'm here today in strong support of House Bill 1114. This bill is an easy bill to support because it decisively furthers efforts to end the school-to-prison pipeline in Maryland. I, like Levi, want to share an example, with the permission of my client, of the very real harm that our current law, which allows students to be charged and arrested for disrupting school activities and personnel, causes. I represented an 11-year-old child in the 6th grade. One day, a substitute teacher asked her to get out of her seat and move to her assigned seat. Although this sounds like a simple request, my client suffered with anxiety for years and had a documented Section 504 plan indicating that if she is called out in front of others, she tends to shut down. My client said nothing to the teacher, but simply froze. The substitute teacher called for administration to come into the classroom and ask her again to move into her assigned seat. Again, my client didn't move, she didn't say a word. At that point, the assistant principal was called in, and the assistant principal inexplicably called the police to respond. When 3 police officers arrived to the school, my 11-year-old client had complied and was walking into the school office. The officer asked her why she wasn't listening. She shrugged her shoulders and said, "I don't know." The officer then told her to put her hands behind her back, handcuffed her, and arrested her for the standalone charge of disrupting school activities and school personnel. My client was then transported to the police station where, and this is the really terrible part, but she was held for 3 hours while her mother frantically drove from a work appointment in Virginia to come get her. And so this incident was devastating and traumatizing for my client, her mother, her entire family. And they're still grappling with why this happened. My client's parent testified last year on this bill. She has written testimony on this bill today, and I urge you to read her testimony. Disability Rights Maryland strongly urges you to support House Bill 1114.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Maddie Long, and I am here on behalf of Strong Schools Maryland in support of House Bill 1114, and thank you to the bill sponsor for reintroducing this bill. As a member of the Maryland Coalition to Reform School Discipline, we support making discipline responsive to students' behavioral needs, fair, appropriate to the infraction, and designed to keep youth on track to graduate. We cannot get to world-class schools with barriers that criminalize Maryland students. As Maryland Education Code 26-101 stands, students can be charged with a misdemeanor crime for, quote, willful disturbances. This language is exceedingly broad and ambiguous and opens the door for subjective interpretations that disproportionately impact students of colors and students with disabilities. Further, Maryland's criminal code covers real offenses, making this provision redundant and simply unnecessary in our education code. The Blueprint for Maryland's Future speaks to an investment in integrated restorative practices to achieve its vision of world-class public schools. This strategy preemptively and responsibly addresses school, community, behavioral, and mental health needs while promoting belonging and healthy interpersonal relationships between students, communities, and their schools. Far better and far more effective methods exist to deal with behavior issues. For these reasons, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. There's quite a few questions, but I'm going to skip to the virtual folks that are in favor too. So Caitlin Barnes, please. And then we'll come back to questions. Ms. Barnes.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Caitlin Barnes, and I'm a student attorney in the Youth Education and Justice Clinic at the University of Maryland Carey School of Law. I am also a former elementary school teacher in Houston and Baltimore. I know from my teaching experience that kids like to push the boundaries. It is a normal part of adolescent development for kids to talk back and play around. But Section 26101 of our education code allows students to be criminally charged for these normal adolescent behaviors. A disabled student who's having a bad day and who says something in the heat of the moment might be perceived as, quote, making a threat, and they can be criminally charged. A Black student who's goofing off might be viewed as, quote, willfully disturbing class, and they can be criminally charged. The offenses in our current statute are subjective because they depend on someone's interpretation of the behavior. This allows bias to enter the decision-making process. And as a result, Black students and students with disabilities are more likely to be criminally charged for behaviors that are not criminalized when committed by white students. During the most recent fully in-person school year, over 57% of students who were arrested for disruption in Maryland schools were Black. The offenses in this current statute are also vague. As a few other people have mentioned, the Fourth Circuit recently declared that a South Carolina law that's very similar to our Maryland statute was unconstitutionally vague because it didn't give students a fair warning of what types of behavior that they needed to avoid. HB 1114 allows Maryland to move away from laws that criminalize children and gives us a chance to move towards policies that support them. And for these reasons, the clinic asks for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Qayyum Muhammad.
Good morning, members of the House Ways and Means Committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. My name is Qayyum Muhammad, and I am testifying on behalf of Youth as Resources, or YAR. Youth as Resources is a youth-led grant-making, leadership development, and community organizing nonprofit organization in Baltimore. YAR is governed by a high-functioning board of directors comprised of 23 youth and young adults ages 14 to 24. Through the efforts of our board each year, we train and support approximately 400 of our peers as grant writers, leaders, advocates, and community organizers. We are writing to give our full support of House Bill 1114, specifying that provisions of law prohibiting and penalizing certain disruptive and threatening behavior on certain school grounds and property do not apply to students who commit offenses at the institution they attend, or students who commit offenses at other institutions while participating in or attending a sporting event or other extracurricular program sponsors at that institution. We believe that if this bill does not pass, it will be harmful in both the short and long term for our youth, while passing this bill will cause a positive disruption to the school to prison pipeline. Arresting our students for the perceived offense of disruption simply provides more excuses and chances for an abuse of power by law enforcement in our schools. This unfairly impacts the future of our youth and students in schools. If our children are treated like they're criminals, it makes them not want to go to school. Attendance rates are already plummeting, and graduation rates have too. Our youth should not be arrested for school disruptions or disruptive behavior, especially when this behavior is often just teens being teens. For these reasons, we strongly support House Bill 1114 and are urging you to support this bill as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, are there any questions for this initial panel? Delegate Fair.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the delegate for bringing this issue forward that
has certainly been an education for me, and I hope for the rest of the committee as well. I did note, I noticed that the Maryland Association of Community Colleges had submitted 2 letters, one which they marked their position as unfavorable, and the other they marked their position as favorable with amendments, and which is why I caught my attention in the first place. And so, but I noticed they put inside of this letter, the last sentence, the allowances for prosecution and the criminal code as outlined by the Office of the Public Defender are specific to juveniles, and we believe that this bill would best serve its intention by removing higher education. Could you comment on that letter and that statement?
Thank you so much for the question, Delegate. And in terms of the 2 letters, they had, so I had a good conversation with Maryland Association of Community Colleges. They unfortunately did not change their position after that, but when they submitted the letter, they sent me a courtesy copy. They had submitted it as unfavorable, and they, after some discussion, they realized that they really don't oppose the bill. They just want higher education, excluded from that. And so they were able to change it. That's why you received 2 letters. In terms of their point, and I really appreciate their sharing their concerns with me, but a couple of different points. And we do believe that higher education needs to be a part of this as well. So first of all, in their letter, they said that more than 40% of the students at community colleges are over 21, but that means almost 60% of students at community colleges are 21 or under, and that includes dual enrolled students. Some of our high schools now have dual enrollment programs where you can earn an associate's degree in high school or take community college classes in high school. So we really want to make sure all students are protected. My own son took community college classes for credit as a teenager before graduating from high school. So, we really want to make sure that all students are protected no matter whether they're at a public school or a private school or an institution of higher education. The other thing is I wanted to mention in terms of that Fourth Circuit decision that you mentioned, that we mentioned earlier, South Carolina changed its law, their disturbing school activities law, so they specifically now say it doesn't apply to students. And I just wanted to read you the first sentence of that. It says, "It is unlawful for a person who is not a student to willfully interfere with, disrupt, or disturb the normal operations of a school or college." So the South Carolina law also does say that college students cannot be charged under their law. What I also wanted to mention that what data we have, we don't have any data from community colleges, but we do have some data from the University of Maryland system, which shows students that were charged under this law, which is not very many, so it's not used a lot at the universities, but it did show the same disparities with most of the students who were charged are Black students. And then the final point again is that, again, the entire criminal code is available. This law is simply unnecessary to apply to any students. Thank you.
Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I read this law, and it's in a different section of, like you point out, it's in the education section. And I would want to know if any of you feel that this is also true. This law was written basically to protect schools from having outside people come in and cause disruptions. It was to discourage community members from showing up in the building and causing a disruption that they would fear being arrested in a larger way than they might be in some other one. It was never aimed at students, and that I believe you are actually, and isn't that so, sorry, Madam Chair, but I believe you are actually clarifying the original intent of the law by drawing students out. This law was never written to discipline students. It was written to discipline other people who came into the building.
You're absolutely correct, Delegate, and thank you for that. But also, it was written in the context of protests against segregation, and there was, I don't know if anybody can speak on that more, but there were protests in the 1970s, I believe, against segregation, 60s or 70s, around the civil rights era. And so this law was actually instituted then, and it was never intended to be used in the way it's used now. And it was only in a couple of decades ago that it really started to be used in the schools for disruptive behavior. Thank you.
Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does your bill have any distinction between conduct that is verbal only versus conduct that is physical? And for example, so I read while we were talking, I skimmed, I didn't read it, it's 40 pages long. But I skimmed the Fourth Circuit's recent opinion in Kenny versus Wilson, and I read the description of those cases from the dissent from Judge Niemeyer. I have to express I have a certain fondness for. He taught me in law school. He's a very good man. And he explained the three individuals in that case. One of them, and perhaps the one that's most well known, was a young woman who was being bullied, and she confronted her bully in the school. And when the school authority said, "Please stop doing this. Please stop, engaging," she used some expletives. She used some expletives. We don't want kids yelling and screaming in the middle of cafeterias, and she was charged. That seems pretty penny ante. I mean, that seems kind of ridiculous, and I would agree with that. But some of the other individuals that were charged under the South Carolina statute that were discussed in the case, one of them was a high school girl who got involved in a very large fight in a hallway. And she was involved in a fight that required police to be called to break up the fight. And because it was unclear as to who had started the fight, who was the principal aggressor in the fight, she wasn't charged criminally with an assault, but she was charged with South Carolina's version of the statute for participating in a fight and having physical contact with the school personnel or police who came to break up the fight. And the other individual, the one that occurred to me the most, was an 8th grade male student who was confronted by school officials with information received from other students who wrote on social media that the individual was going to shoot up a school. Multiple students were interviewed and claimed that the student talked about shooting up the school the previous day when he was riding the school bus and that they were frightened. He denied the allegations. The charge was ultimately dismissed against him. But as a result of the charge, he was placed in a program or in some way, shape, or form, he was dealt with by the school authorities. And I guess my question is this. Would your bill, by eliminating this statute, how would people deal with those situations? So you have physical altercations or the threat of physical altercations between students and teachers, between students and students that maybe don't rise to the police coming out and arresting you and charging you with first or second degree assault, or you have a suspicion of a school shooter. Would your bill eliminate those? Because I'm all for eliminating, hey, we're sending kids to school because they had a verbal fight with each other and they used bad language. I'm okay with eliminating the criminalization. But I don't know if I'm okay with eliminating the possibility for the authorities to at least address the criminal aspects of school shooter threats or of physical conduct towards teachers or students.
Thank you for the question, Delegate. And I'd like to defer. I'm not a lawyer, so I'd like to defer to somebody who is. But I will just say, if we try to parse this law out too much, that it's this and not this, in the heat of whatever's happening, it just gives too much discretion to the school officers where they have to try to figure out exactly what's going on in the heat of the moment. And, we just want to make it clear that if something is a crime and the officers know that something is a crime, they can still charge it, but that these education-related things are not crimes. But I'd like to defer to Michelle, if that's okay.
Sure.
On the legal question.
I just had one follow-up, but I'd be happy to hear your perspective. Thank you.
Sure, and I'm happy, and thank you for that question. And, I think the most important thing is that the issue with this particular law is that it is written so broadly that is what makes it unconstitutionally vague. And so I agree that if an individual is threatening to shoot up a school, there are statutes that cover that, such as threats of mass violence, or just general threats. If someone is involved in an assault in a school fight, there is, you can be charged with second-degree assault. And I'll also say, it notes at the end of the opinion that, and this is quoting directly from it, lest there be any confusion, we do not hold that schools are powerless to discipline elementary and second school students, And so what this statute is trying to get at is that the way that this statute is used and the students who are ultimately caught under this statute are those who are engaged in something that does not arise to, I think, the latter examples that you discussed. And that is what we're trying to eliminate with this statute. And that's really the issue with it being written so broadly and so vaguely.
I just have one follow-up, if I could, Madam Chair. I want to present a hypothetical, I guess, for the bill sponsor or anybody. Hypothetically, what does the teacher or the school do if 2 or 3 students, middle schoolers, high schoolers, decide in the middle of the classroom day, we're not going to pay any attention to you, We're going to start screaming and yelling at each other. We're going to be throwing things across the classroom. We're going to be mocking and making fun and bullying other students in the class. The teacher says, stop, get out of the class. I'm not going. Can't make me go. To blank with you. And they keep doing it. The teacher says, stop, get out of the class. I refuse. You can't make me. I'm not going. Then they call the principal and they call the school resource officer and they show up and they say, gee, I don't want to be on the front page of the Washington Post today, so I'm just going to continually nicely ask, you have to get out of the class. Please leave. You're in trouble. Blank you. I'm not leaving. What are you going to do? They don't make any physical activity, but they ruin that class day for every other student in that class. And they may have traumatized that teacher. They may have affected that entire school's ability to meet its educational goals. What is it that we do with that student? I mean, I know you can say, well, we can punish them maybe when they come back tomorrow, we can send them to another school. But what if we send them to the other school and they do the same thing the next day or the next week? What do we do as a deterrent to that behavior?
Well, thank you, Delegate. That's a big question, and I would say that there are a lot of processes defined in the schools about this very thing, and that's the educational experts certainly know a lot more about that than I do. But does anybody want to address that? Anybody else have a? I mean, it's not a simple question. It's a big question, and it's something that that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, I think it's a complicated question. That's why I have concerns about the bill. Thank you very much for your candor.
I can just very briefly, I think it's a hard question that everyone's grappling with. But first of all, right, there's the whole school discipline code that sort of is at the school administration's disposal. But I think that also begs the larger question, right, of what is sort of the root cause of these behaviors. And there's a whole slew of, as the delegate said, processes that can be put in place. There's functional behavioral assessments that are specifically used to evaluate and assess and determine sort of the root causes of these behaviors and replacement behaviors. There's referrals to the Section 504 or student support teams or IEP teams if that's appropriate. There's wraparound services. The blueprint is, mental health services. So we appreciate the question, but I do think that there are a lot of other processes and the school discipline code at the school's disposal.
Thank you.
Delegate Plakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Ruth, for bringing this bill back. I just had a kind of a technical question. So you mentioned that this was a bill we had passed before. Is this bill in the same posture as we passed it? Does it include the Senate amendment? If you could just clarify on that.
Thank you for that question. This is in the posture in which it passed the Senate, which has one amendment. As previously introduced, the bill would also have said that students on exclusionary discipline could not be charged under this, which would be primarily students who were suspended. There was a reason for that because there have been some cases where a student was suspended, hadn't yet been removed from the school. One case where a student didn't know that they were suspended and they stormed out of class and ultimately were protected. But there were concerns about that. The Senate removed that particular provision in order to avoid the situation from last session where we had two different versions and we weren't able to get those crossed over. I did introduce it in the form that it passed the Senate. Thank you.
Delegate Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for bringing this bill. A couple concerns I want to piggyback a little bit off of what the minority leader was talking about. So as a kid who was a troubled kid who got in fights and got suspended and got detention and if you don't have respect for school and the administration and the teachers, the school discipline process doesn't really affect you. Sometimes it does need a certain level of escalation, and I completely agree. We have a kid throwing a fit in his classroom, right? We don't want, or even kids get into a fight. You know what I mean? I'm grateful I didn't get charged for getting fights at school. Otherwise, I may not be here, right? So we're not talking about that, but we're talking about, things like, so in the, and I'm getting to my question. So in the physical note, it says molestation. Cannot be charged under molestation. It's a pretty serious offense. And certainly not all threats are the same. right? It's one thing for a 6-year-old to threaten a teacher, right? It's a very different thing from somebody who's maybe 6'1", blonde, sitting in the corner over here, threatening a 5-foot, well, you're getting older, threatening a 5'1" teacher with physical violence. Those are two very different things, even though they would both be caught up in that. So can you speak to, how we would handle these situations, especially with molestation, which is not a minor offense, at least in my humble opinion, and with varying degrees of threats that would be protected under this bill?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to defer to Michelle on that.
Sure, thank you for the question. So yes, this language molest has caused a lot of confusion over the years, and really, there's two definitions of molest: to bother or a sexual molestation. And as interpreted in this bill being read, a person may not molest or threaten. This has always been interpreted in courts as to bother. So I don't, this statute has not been interpreted to get to the sexual offenses that you're concerned with. The second piece, though, is that we do have the entire part of the criminal code that is engaging with concerns of sexual conduct. I have had cases arising from school that have involved a boy in the cafeteria touching a girl's butt, and that was charged as a 4th-degree sex offense. So, the notion that this statute gets at that or is meant to get at that is, I think, a misnomer, a misunderstanding, and that is how that is charged, could continue to be charged, and really the statute does not get at that particular concern. The same thing with threats. If something is a criminal threat, we have an entire part of the criminal law that deals with criminal threats. And so, this statute, again, gets at things that fall outside of that ambit of something that is criminal and covered by the criminal code, and that's what we're trying to get at with this bill.
And I guess my last piece was kind of to follow up on my first kind of statement, which meant to be a question. But what about those students who, for whatever reason, this is a little close to home, did not have respect for the school system, right? And did not really recognize their discipline. If I don't want to be at school, I get suspended. That's a vacation for me, right? How does this serve as an effective backstop to the kids who do not care about school discipline and that part of school discipline, and sometimes need a higher level of deterrent?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you again for the question. And so first of all, I think that, again, this is part of a larger conversation, but it's not this bill. This bill is about a particular piece of statute, which is wrongly in the education code, which is vague, probably unconstitutional, and regardless of how we solve those bigger problems, this statute should not be applied to children. There are a lot of discussions going on about how we deal with that. There is, as a last resort, as you mentioned, suspension and even expulsion available. Hopefully, we can find other ways of helping most students so that that's not necessary, but it is still an option. There is a larger conversation that goes on that we're not going to solve with this bill, but this bill is not about that.
I'd also add, all of the interventions that Megan spoke to previously that are available, but I'd also say disrespect is not a crime.
Agreed.
And that is the problem that we see with this bill, is that we are criminalizing disrespect. And ultimately, as the Fourth Circuit said, this criminalizing disrespect or criminalizing that type of conduct is unconstitutional. And so regardless of, I know that we have these aspirations for young people and that we want young people to carry themselves in a certain way. We want them to grow. We want them to be challenged and all of those types of things. But at the same time, we can't do it at the expense of the Constitution and of their rights. And so we have to, I think, engage in bolster the other supports that we have in our communities, the supports we have for other interventions that students might need. That's where the intervention needs to take place.
And I appreciate that. Again, our concerns aren't about disrespect, or our concerns are about people feeling safe. And so thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Delegate Miller, then Delegate Miracle North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I I have a couple of points I wanted to seek clarification on. One of my biggest concerns, of course, is direct impact on the classroom. And when you were saying something about, we were talking about sexual offenses or molestation, the disruption is sorted into the following categories per the law, and sex offenses is one of them.
So again, that the court has never, in the cases both reported and unreported, has never interpreted molest to be talking about sexual molestation. And reading it in the context of this statute, the sentence of the statute, a person may not molest or threaten with bodily harm any student. And so we're talking about bothering, harassing, and that type of conduct. But again, there is an entire section of the criminal code, 3-301, et cetera, that talks about sexual crimes and sexual molestation. If anything from, as I just said, the touching a student on the butt in the cafeteria all the way up to first-degree rape. And so that is where, and under those statutes, that's where that type of conduct is charged. So, to the extent that there's a concern that this statute would allow molestation in schools, that's not true, because the sexual crimes gets at that. I always say when talking about this bill is that a crime is a crime, no matter where it's committed, and so we don't need a specific murder statute in schools, right? We know that you can't commit a murder in school, and so similarly with molest, if we say that this does not apply to students, that doesn't mean that they can molest or threaten anyone. If something rises again to a criminal level, that's where it's charged under the criminal code.
I just want to make sure, because we earlier passed the Hear Our Voices, the Title IX Act, where we actually made stronger representation of our Title IX coordinators in our schools because of the largely because of the testimony that was given about some of those very concerning behaviors that a lot of young women are dealing with in school. And so I certainly would not want to peel back any of those protections. The other thing is, how many actual teachers, not unions, not groups, not representative, but actual teachers that are currently in the classroom dealing with the struggles that our good delegate had mentioned when he was describing some of the issues that they're having in the classroom? So how many actual teachers did you talk to about this?
I couldn't begin to say. I've talked to many people about that. Virtually, most of the people I've spoken to are supportive. I believe, Callie, did you want to?
I could just briefly speak to that, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Yes, so I agree that teachers are dealing with a lot of really tough behaviors in the classrooms. I taught at the very beginning of the pandemic, so I was already starting to see some of that happen, and it's definitely still a challenge. I would say that teachers don't want to arrest their students. Teachers don't want to see their students put in those situations. Teachers are going to want to help their students get to the root cause of the behavior, make sure that if they are needing counseling, they get the counseling. If they need some sort of outside support, we can pair them with that. And so I think, if heaven forbid a student does do something incredibly serious, there will be ways for that to be handled, but teachers are not waking up in the morning, hoping that they can get their students arrested if they do something under this really vague statute. So I think the focus is that we don't want to be criminalizing students more. We want to be criminalizing them less, and we want to be helping them deal with some of the behaviors that we are seeing. I hope that is somewhat responsive.
I want to clarify the intent of my question. I never said that I thought teachers were waking up wanting to criminalize students, but I am saying that teachers are waking up and going into classrooms that are very difficult to deal with, and a lot of them do not. The ones I talk to that are getting kicked, hit, scratched, everything else, desks thrown, they don't know how to handle some of the situations that they were being put on. They were actually not taught nor trained to handle those situations. And when they are asking for support from their administrators, they are not. And we can't assume that they all have BIPs, that they all have 504s, that they all have IEPs, or they need a mental health evaluation. That's not always the case. So I think we really need to talk to the teachers that are struggling right now in their classrooms, because taking away any kind of options that they have may impact them. And that's all I'm concerned about, is the impact on other students, as the good delegate had said, and about those teachers that are standing in that gap for our students.
Thank you. Delegate Miracle North.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for this bill. So I am also a lawyer. I'm also a mom of a 6-year-old. I'm also a former prosecutor. So I have seen these cases come up. This charge was one of many on my docket. It'd be one of maybe 3 or 4 charges. The other one would be might be sex offense or second-degree assault. So I'm curious, you mentioned earlier about the colleges having like data on who is getting charged. Is there anything from the judiciary as to who is getting charged, what's being pled to? Because I found in my experience, this is really a kitchen sink law. Hardly ever went on because of its vagueness. It was always something more specific to the actual incident that we chose to go forward on if it was a plea. So I'm wondering if there's any data judiciary possible to kind of shed light as to what's really happening in Maryland.
You want to address that? Or?
Well, so in terms of, the data specifically that we received from a subpoena or an MPIA from University of Maryland was the arrest data, so it didn't disaggregate in terms of what the ultimate resolution of those cases are. And then the cases that were cited in our testimony are all of the cases that I found going back to 2015. Any case that went up to an appeal where they were challenging specifically this offense. So, but we don't have data of how often this was the last thing that was left on the table. I know, anecdotally from my colleagues, a lot of times after a trial, this could be the last thing that was left. If there was, in one of the cases here talks about a school fight where this was the last thing that was left at the end of the trial. So, I do think the Department of Juvenile Services data, the most recent data, also shows that this was charged in the 2022 fiscal year. It was 856 times, ended up in a petition. So again, and the way that I read the MSDE data versus the DJS data is that the DJS data shows anytime something is in the petition versus the MSDE data tends to show if that's the only charge. The way that I was understanding it. So that kind of gets to your question. And then more specifically, did judiciary provide anything? No.
Yeah. I figured, because I wanted just to clarify, when you say petition, you mean that when DJS gets it after the arrest is made, it goes to DJS?
Well, so their data starts at intake, so things that are making it to the intake stage.
I just want to make sure you understand. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. Delegate Eversole.
Just one last question, and by the way, I was a teacher, and I don't want my students arrested, okay? Generally, I wouldn't like to see them. Is there any evidence to show that threat of arrest in some of these extreme situations that have been described, they're mostly hypothetical anyway, but they do exist, that this would serve as a deterrent to a student that has risen to that threshold, that the idea that they might get arrested might suddenly stop them from their behavior?
I mean, no, and I think that really what we saw in the report on the school to prison pipeline is that deterrence is not really something that is effective and works when we're talking about young people in particular because of, as Delegate Ruth talked about in the beginning, right, adolescent brain development and the fact that they are not thinking of those types of long-term consequences. And so that's not the thing that is triggering decision-making. So, the threat of arrest and deterrence is not necessarily a thing that is going to be effective with young people.
Thank you for your answer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 1114. Committee, that concludes our bill hearings for today. Please listen up tomorrow on the floor for any possible meetings that would be late in the day, like 4 o'clock. We will probably be voting at 5:30. And so during the day, if you have subcommittee meetings, you can get all that work done after the floor. And we will probably also have a voting session on Friday. Thank you very much. And committee party, you folks need to get on your skits or whatever. Delegate Barnes has an announcement.
Right after this, go up to your office and jump on your Zoom buckle, and it should be quick. Thank you.
Madam Vice Chair has an announcement.
Election Law Subcommittee will meet immediately after floor tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, folks.